Welcome everyone to another video. I had another side project the previous weeks. Some of you sometimes asked about the real performance of this various stuff like the SGI and such compared to other systems, and I wondered myself. Of course, I had some gut feeling working on the Ultra 5 or Octane, what their relative speed is, but I've never conducted a complete benchmark of those. So when I realized the IdeaPad with the AMD Ryzen, although it was throttling with a configurable thermal design power, it was still often similar fast than a some years older Mac Pro workstation. I started here some extensive benchmarking. So what I used for this was my own open bench. I started over 10 years ago for a Linux magazine article, but I've not really done something with this the last 10 years. The reason I use this and not some Phoronix benchmark suite or something is that I benchmarked very old systems, and even with this light benchmarking it already took quite some time, so I did not want to wait weeks or months for benchmark results. This open bench is a little bit modeled after the spec suite. I've never personally seen the spec suite, only some results. So I benchmark here GZIP, LAME, MedPlay and such. I only recently added set standard. And original, this included some more benchmark like Tram3D and Botane, some C++ crypto library. However, I wanted to keep this benchmark short. I may repeat this in the future with more benchmarks added, maybe even libjpeg or something. However, I screwed it slightly up because initially I only created this benchmark to compare GCC versions. So only when I already compiled here quite some systems, I noticed some imperfection in these results, and they are due to this compression data. So part of the compression data is from the system binaries because I wanted to see here some binary data, and unfortunately it changes the results a little bit between systems, and I will change this for the next runs. However, compiling this dataset took quite some time, and I did not want to totally throw this time spent on this into the dumpster. Also did not want to have you wait longer for these results. So finally coming to the results. You have not seen all of the systems. Some of the systems I've shown here already, and the others I will show in the future. The set consists of build time, which obviously is not entirely comparable because all the systems also using other CPU architectures, so it may be more time consuming to optimize for MIPS or Spark than it is for x86 or the other way around. And also the compiler versions were not entirely the same. All these old x86 systems I benchmarked with the same hard drive, so they were all running the same binary tar dataset and also the exactly same system and compiler version. And also this systems here at the end were using the same AMD 64 system. However, many in the middle, especially PowerPC here and Spark and MIPS and ARM, they were all using their dedicated systems. So it's not entirely comparable. However, it gives you some indication. What should be a little bit more comparable is here the runtime data. However, as I said, I screwed this slightly up. So libmed, LAME and GNU-PG probably should be entirely comparable, but this compression sets here, as I said, use slightly different data for the different systems. I will rerun this next month or so, maybe even with more systems. The results are sorted by the libmed table, I think, because I wanted to have a little bit nice sorting. So the sorting here already should give you some rough performance sorting here. So the very first system we got there is a 133 MHz Pentium. I will not hold all systems in the camera. For one thing, it will take too long, and for another, I do not want to unpack them all. But you can trust me when I say I really benchmarked them all. So this is a 133 MHz Pentium. These old systems, I quite maxed them out with the memory, because in the meantime I had some spare memory in the archive. Originally it had only 16 MB of RAM or something, so I found some bigger and more modules. So this is now 64 or something like that. Also, a little bit side note, I overclocked some of the systems. So this is rated 120 MHz, but I was running this at 133 just for the slightly faster build. But this does not affect the results at all. If I would have brought this back in the day as 133 MHz Pentium, it would be that fast. A funny side note is even the CPUs back in the day, they were manufactured with a CPU ID string of Pentium 75 to 160 or something. You can look this up in our T2 hardware listing. Also, just to hold another system in the camera, this is a IDT WinChip that I also slightly overclocked. So as I said in my earlier video, this is an IDT WinChip 240, and at least how I found it in the attic, it was jumpered to 225 megahertz. So this may be even 83 megahertz by 3. Yeah, this is jumper to 3, so the system bus is probably running slightly out of spec. I did this mostly because I was curious how much I can overclock these old systems, because back in the day I spent all my money into even those cheap systems and I did not mess with overclocking. I was actually surprised to find that it was possible. If you are thinking to get a vintage system like a Sun UltraSpark 5 or PlayStation 3 or even PowerPC stuff from Apple, this is a G4 or G5, or other vintage systems in between them, because I noticed some people spend quite too much money for this on eBay. So I wanted to give a rough estimate of what you can expect to get. So the runtime is mostly measuring single-threaded performance, only set standard is partially multi-threaded, and the build time, however, is multi-threaded. So here you get a much better result here for more new multi-threaded systems. And you see the build time here, this only takes a second on modern CPUs, and it took 281 seconds on a 133 MHz Pentium. Also, what you can see here from the results, you can pause the video and study them in more detail. One outliner is this BeagleBoard here, and this is not wrong. After I saw this result, I have actually rerun this. So this BeagleBoard is some 600 or what it was. Maybe I write the exact spec of all of those in the comments below. The small embedded system nowadays obviously outperforms an Octane or Sun UltraSpark by quite some margin. The only exception here is MP3. And I think this result is already slightly better. I think initially it was worse, and I've rerun it twice, and it really is that bad for some strange reason. Maybe the compiler is generating the really strange code or something. Initially the result was even worse because SD card access is so slow that it took already 10 seconds or so just to read the WAV file from the SD card. So I actually changed the script on just the BeagleBoard to use a Unix DD command to pipe this WAV file to dev/null before running the test to effectively cache the file. I think this improved the benchmark slightly, and this is already the improved number for this. But yeah, for some reason it really performs that bad. And the other embedded board here that often performs quite a bit better, except here the BSIP2 test for some reason, is a MIPS Creator 20. That is a dual-core embedded MIPS, 32-bit only. So you could say a little bit an Octane successor. And of course, so this means nowadays such an embedded board is much powerful than an Octane. This is CI20 here. This is half of the runtime here. BSIP2 compared here is even less than half. Set standard, yeah, even only a third or something. Sometimes the performance is again like the BeagleBoard limited by the slow flash here. This system was also running mostly from the SD card. Some obvious candidates I did not benchmark because I simply don't have them. So for example, we don't have a Raspberry Pi because we had already other boards, BeagleBoard and others. We also don't have time and interest to get each and every embedded board out there. But the general trend here is recognizable. For me, it is a relief to see that this IDT WinChip is performing indeed quite good. Back in the day, I probably did not really do benchmarks. I trusted some printed magazine articles for this. And you also see that it's a UltraSpark 5 running at 360 megahertz. Yes, in retrospect, I should have made here more markers with the benchmark names, but that's what it is now. Again, I will put the detailed specs in the comment below. So the 360 MHz UltraSpark 5 is not really faster than, at least not always. Sometimes surprisingly it is faster, but not always. So you see how the code generation and load pattern of cache hits and memory bandwidth and such affects the results. Again, runtime, this is single-threaded, so it is also interesting to see that as this is single-threaded, the 200 megahertz octane, or 195 actually only, is here sometimes faster than the Sun UltraSpark running at 360 megahertz. Build time wise, this is even more seeable. So, and here the octane is indeed faster, but keep in mind that this is sorted by libmet. Libmet gave the best sorted results because we had some outliers here. But again, build time wise, you cannot really compare the systems directly because code generation can be quite a different thing between MIPS and Spark. However, build time in a way gives the best overall system performance because it really takes parallel builds into account. To go here through the runtime results, as it's sorted by this MP3 decoding, the basic trend here is what you would expect with systems becoming faster. One strange outliner is the PlayStation 3 with its massive multi-gigahertz. I think it was 2 gigahertz something or so. But if I remember correctly, the CPU is quite in order CPU or something to reach such a high clock speed. And also for games can make use of this SPE processing elements. So game performance, of course, varies when you make use of this additional coprocessors. But performance-wise here for normal runtime, except set standard where we can run more in parallel, often the performance here is often transmitter crusoe is actually not too much off, and the transmitter crusoe is actually quite slow when you compare this with the transmitter efficient one running at 1.2 gigahertz. The performance was actually not too bad for its day. And comparing this to the PlayStation, this transmitter efficient surprisingly often is quite ahead of a PlayStation 3 for most of the runtime things here. Where do we stand? Even PS3, even build time is actually still quite close here, and the PS3 with this simultaneously multi-threading implementation can probably make a little bit more use of the available memory bandwidth. But even here, build time, you see a 1 GHz AMD Athlon XP is similar to a much faster clocked and simultaneously multi-threaded PS3. And even this booklet 3G is running a Z series Atom with 1.6 GHz or so. So here you see how slow these atoms really were when you compare this to much older, much lower frequency Athlons. This cube is heavily upgraded, so this is 1.2 gigahertz. The original cube only came with 450 or 500 megahertz. This is running a processor upgrade, and you see how similar it compares to a gigahertz Athlon. So much for the performance of Apple fans who said the PowerPC is so much greater. Runtime here is also similar, if not sometimes slower, for the PowerPC. This is a 2 GHz dual-core G5, one of the very last. For me, it is surprising that it's only 2 times as fast about than a G4 here in this cube. I would have thought it should be much faster given the extremely power-hungry and high bandwidth G5. But at least build time-wise, even set standard here, even though it's running in parallel, it's not really twice as fast here often. And yeah, then comes low performance Opterons, then very old Mac Pro, even early MacBook with Intel Core Duo, MacBook Air, Surface Pro, and as you have seen already in the IdeaPad benchmark, the decade-old dual Xeon 8-core Mac Pro is not really faring too well here. Really in the range of Surface of tablets nowadays. So this is also a warning for those who want to get an old Mac Pro from eBay. The performance is really not that outstanding today anymore. Even a tablet PC overtakes it easily. And as you've seen already, the IdeaPad, the AMD Ryzen, even with a configurable thermal design power, quite in the top of the line here. This is my Retina MacBook Pro from 3 years ago. And yeah, this IdeaPad is not so much behind, although the MacBook Pro is consuming quite a bit more energy. And this is from the data center, just some Xeon that I happen to have available there as a server. Unsurprisingly, this comes out ahead here. So I'm currently waiting for the latest AMD Ryzen for our new server builds. As I said, we don't really buy each generation here. We are not a virtual server hosting company, so I don't have all the latest greatest available. But I think in general it's a nice indicator of the performance of the systems of the last 20 years. And I showed you I have a 386 and a Spark Station and this Apple Power Mac 8100 with 80 megahertz. So maybe in the future I will even try in a month or two to use this for benchmarks, but this will totally explode the benchmark here at the low end. This for sure will run for days to finish even some basic GSIP benchmark. Here at the runtime again, as we looked at the build time a second ago, no surprise here, only that the last systems here are relatively close, even with a more parallel set standard. As I said in the beginning, this is mostly single-threaded performance. Actually, my MacBook Pro shines quite a bit, but even there it is not so much faster than the IdeaPad with an AMD Ryzen. And from my side, it's really very nice to see that AMD is back in the game again. And we also had here some Phenom 2 6-core here in the benchmarking part. This is a mini ITX system running for server nodes here. I think this is around 100 watts, but we undervolted slightly, so this is probably undervolted to less than 100 watts, like maybe 80 or something. So performance-wise, when people complain with this AMD Ryzen mobile here with this limited thermal design power, yes, it's not enough for AAA games, but performance-wise, it is much ahead compared to an AMD Phenom 6-core from 4 years ago or something. So even a tablet and ultra thin and light nowadays run circles around of this, not to mention all the previous systems. So I hope this is a nice performance comparison. I think there are probably not as many diverse benchmarks as this. And as I said, I found a tiny flaw here in the benchmark myself with this compressed data. I will fix this for the next iteration. If enough people watch this video, give it a thumbs up and share and subscribe. I will rerun this in a month or two with even more systems into the game. I have another Motorola embedded board and other things, and 386 and 40 megahertz Spark. If you want to see more of this crazy benchmark comparing apples and oranges, totally vintage legacy systems with latest state-in-the-arts, and again we have AMD Ryzen 2700 mini ITX boards on order. So we will have more state-of-the-art and more vintage systems coming for you, and I hope you enjoyed it, and not only for my views, but also really to help people to make an educated decision what they buy on eBay. Because I wanted to buy some more old vintage stuff on eBay, and even for me the prices go too high. I will for sure not spend hundreds of euros for standard PC components that are effectively worthless. And I think some people are overestimating their performance when they get the systems for retro and vintage gamings. I think this is in the interest of many who are looking for either vintage gaming or vintage computing. Watch this video and get some performance estimate, especially for Power PCs here from Apple, for Sun Unix workstations, Ultra 5. I did not benchmark the Ultra 30 yet, but the performance will likely be similar. Octane-wise, I think the performance is surprisingly good, especially compared to this Ultra 5. However, do not forget that I think the Octane consumes way more electricity, most likely. And yeah, this is a single CPU, this is a dual CPU, and likely the memory bandwidth performance is way higher here on this extremely fancy crossbar switch that the Octane has. I think some performance is surprisingly good. The Swin chip is, in my opinion, surprisingly good for the cheap entry level that it was back in the day. And these embedded boards are also comparing relatively okay in this vintage PC background, especially with the PS3 and booklet and probably G4 here in the mix, and even maybe compared to high power systems like the G5. And yeah, so that was my other side project the last weeks, and don't forget to share, like and subscribe for all these other surprising videos from me to come out. I hope you enjoy the alternative content I'm doing. and I'm looking forward to see you soon for all the next crazy ideas I have. And by the way, I intentionally run this with an 1080 resolution because often when I video captured this, I was actually missing a little bit at the top of the button because I forgot that captured 1080p. So you also see how much you miss here for, unfortunately, all the 16:9 displays instead of 10 many people are forced to use nowadays. So that's it for today, and I hope to see you soon.